that 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. And that reignited the move toward sterilization and eugenics in this country. And many more people died and were sterilized as a result, okay? But we never reached, so it's a story about be careful what you move to the federal level. Maybe there's some virtue in our laboratories of experiment, as Justice Brandeis called our states. Maybe you can stop things or start good ideas. We talk about good ideas too that come out of the state level and percolate up. And you don't want to destroy federalism. You just want to make sure, again, you have the right balance between the two. You don't want to destroy the federal government. You need both. I mean, Madison knew this. It's that tension that improves our thinking, right? It's ambition against ambition. But when there's one person or one group that answers for everybody, you sometimes get good answers and you sometimes get very bad answers, like you did in Buck versus Bell. The good news is, because it was never purely a federal issue, we never did what Nazi Germany did, right? We never had, I mean, there is a single powerful state and one decider. And of course, their record on eugenics was far, far worse than ours. So if there's a silver lining in Harriet Buck's story, it's that. Not much of one, but there it is.
It was so striking that you told that story. You quoted Justice Brandeis on Laboratories of Democracy, and you also used Justice Brandeis as your epigraph. Those who won our independence by revolution were not cowards. They did not exalt order at the cost of liberty, a quotation from his famous Whitney case, which you also quote. Are you, you know I'm a huge fan of Justice Brandeis. Do you admire him as well?
What do you think?
Great, excellent. It's wonderful. Janie, the chapter on federalism is so powerful. During our student town hall, the students were great in defining separation of powers, but it was a little tougher to sum up federalism. Why is federalism important, and what are you trying to tell about it in this chapter?
I sympathize with where they're coming from, because it takes so much in the last sort of 30, 40 years, in the span of sort of their lifetime, my lifetime, so much has moved to the national level that I think for folks who are younger, certainly my kids, they were asking me today, well, what's state versus federal government? They see everything being pushed national. And, you know, Department of Education, in, you know, the early 1970s, there was not a cabinet level Department of Education. Today, it has 4,000 employees, budget of, I think, $70 billion. And a lot of that money is being given to states with certain conditions attached to it. And, you know, Justice tells a funny story about a governor of Nebraska, Ben Nelson, I think was his name,
yep.
Who said, you know, I took this job and I sometimes didn't realize I would just be sort of a federal branch manager of the federal government. And I think we've moved so far in recent decades, again, seemingly since the 70s, in really shifting power up to the federal government. And so in the chapter, we want to remind readers of some of the reasons why our founders thought federalism was a good thing. Some of it was if you know, Buck v. Bell, if you answer things at a federal level once and for all, you sort of lose these laboratories of democracies, the ability to have good ideas sort of percolate up and sort of potentially stop bad ideas from percolating up. Some of it is really just going back to Tocqueville and the idea of community association. Like, you know, there's only so many people who can be a federal congressman or president, right? But there's, you know, lots of people who can sit on a board of education or their local school board, the local school board or town council. And it really gets back to, I think, the gift our founders gave us of self-rule. And it's just so much more possible at a local level.
Will you really make that case and show that this is a non-partisan issue? We've had recently Dean Heather Gerken of Yale Law School came to defend federalism and state constitutions as being able to help liberals as well as conservatives. Judge Jeff Sutton has made the same case, and you make it very powerfully in this book. The next chapter is Bureaucracy Unbound, and you tell the great story of Marty the Magician. So tell that story.
So if we're losing something by losing our opportunity to connect with one another at the local level by elevating everything up to the federal government. And again, it's not that we shouldn't do some of that, it's a matter of balance. What's happened at the federal level? That's what this chapter is about. And it's about how so much of our lawmaking authority, which was vested in Article 1 in a Congress composed of 2 houses of elected representatives, we, the people, acting through our representatives, bringing to bear the collective wisdom of the masses, right? And in a way, that bicameralism and presentment, which we all know is difficult, is designed to ensure that minority voices can be heard in particular, because they often are at the fulcrum of decision making. You need to get to 50+1. You gotta make compromises to get that 50+1 in 2 houses. What happens when you move that lawmaking power to the executive branch, to a president who's accountable directly to the people, to be sure, but he only cares about his electoral responsibility. He cares about 50+1 of the nation as a whole. Do you have that same deliberative care and process that you might have in the legislative branch? Is there a loss there? And we tell the story of Marty the magician. Marty does children's shows. He loves magic. The guy loves magic. Janie can tell you just how much he loves. Read a book about Harry Houdini as a kid. That was it. And he's doing a show one day, and somebody comes up to him at the show and flashes a badge and says, "I'm here from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Do you have a license for your rabbit?" Right out of the hat. And he says, "Why, no, I do not have a license for my rabbit." "Do I need one?" "Why, yes, you do. There was a law that Congress passed it, no doubt a good law, well, certainly well-intended, that says circuses and zoos with certain animals need to have a license, and other animal exhibitors." There's that phrase. And they wrote a regulation saying, basically, not just zoos and carnivals and obvious things where you might care about the elephants, but Marty the magician with his rabbit needs a federal license. We, the people, didn't vote on that. Our elected representatives, well, I mean, they did right, and other animal exhibitors. But one has to wonder what they had in mind. At any rate, Marty's a law-abiding citizen. He got his license. You know, though, something happened after that. Hurricane Katrina happened shortly after that. And they rewrote their regulations and said, well, now you have to have an emergency preparedness plan as well. Like, he had to hire an expert in emergency preparedness plan writing, and he wrote a 28-page document. Now, the emergency preparedness plan expert thought that was rather short, and he wasn't sure it was going to fly. And you had to detail everything you do, from chemical spills to hurricanes. And Marty's like, as he told one agent, I live in Missouri. We have tornadoes. And I do worry about tornadoes. And I have a plan. I'm going to get the family in the basement, and the dog and the cat, and then if there's time, I'll get the rabbit. You know, the agent said, no, I don't care about any of that. It's the rabbit that has to go first. They didn't see the humor in it. Marty also then started asking other questions like, well, okay, rabbits are covered, but what about like other things? What if I had an iguana I pulled out of the hat? That's not covered, by the way. You can have an iguana without a federal license, but a rabbit, don't ask me why. Don't ask. And it's only if you're exhibiting the rabbit. So Marty said, that means if I wanted to have the rabbit for stew tonight, I wouldn't need a license? You wouldn't need a license, though. Okay, all right. Now, there are home inspections, too, that come with federal licensing. And during one home inspection, the inspector comes in and wants to see the cage where he carries the rabbit to the shows. And Marty shows him the cage. It's a cage. And the inspector says, but it doesn't have any this way up stickers. So how do you know how to carry the rabbit? And Marty said, why, there's a handle on the top. I said, not good enough. You have to have the stickers. So he said, where do I get the stickers? I'll send you some. 2 weeks later, he got 200 stickers in the mail from the federal government. Your tax dollars at work. That's what's going on. And that's a humorous story, and it has a happy ending. Ultimately, administrations change, and the regulation gets dropped that cover people like Marty. But isn't there something in that, too? That rather than we, the people, deciding how far this good idea should go, whoever's president can flip-flop the requirements every 4 years based on what they think, and it only requires them to think so. Now, I don't doubt the value that there are great experts at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and in all of our agencies, and they have much to add in advising us, we the people, in how to rule ourselves. But what happens when we give up the responsibility and the opportunity to rule ourselves and hand it to one unelected group of people to change their minds every 4 years? That's the question we pose in the book through Marty.
And Jeannie, what struck you about in that bureaucracy unbound chapter about the costs of federalizing everything?
Well, certainly one of the costs, and we talk about this in a later chapter, and a reminder of every time we talk about Marty, is really the cost on equality. And so when there are so many rules being churned out, sort of who wins and who loses, who can keep up with it, who can't keep up with it, when decisions are made behind closed doors, who has more access to those decision makers, who doesn't. And I'm reminded of one of the stories we tell in the equality chapter of a family farm, an apple orchard farm. And actually the New York Times did a profile on them a number of years ago and discovered, according to the New York Times estimate, there are 5,000 rules that apply to this orchard at the federal level alone. And the orchard owner said, the number of rules on ladders alone, and there were rules, regulations on sort of the tilt that the ladder had to have against the tree, right? And there were rules on every morning someone had to sort of scour the orchard to look for mice droppings in the event that someone stepped on the mouse dropping, stepped on the ladder, put their hand on the ladder they stepped on, then touched an apple, someone would eat the apple without washing, you get it. And okay, so if we live in that world, then who's going to best be able to understand the 5,000 rules and abide by it? The small orchard owner or sort of a larger organization. And so certainly that's one of the things that struck me in the bureaucracy chapter. Other things that I had not fully appreciated before, we quote a professor, Jonathan Turley, who said you are 10 times more likely to end up in a case before an agency than in federal court. And I think that seeing my kids now and what they're learning or not learning, you learn so much about federal courts, but really so much of the action is happening in agencies now. And it's sort of happening in a way that I think is not necessarily so visible to us unless you are actually the one before the agency. So there's some few things that struck me.
Can I follow up on that? So yeah, what does it mean? What are these agency adjudications, right? So if Marty violates a rule or the apple orchard or whatever, the agency that brings the charges against, who writes the rule, kind of an act of legislation, if you will, also decides if you violated the rule and prosecutes you for it, kind of the executive branch traditionally understood. And then they have employees who judge you. They used to be called hearing officers, but now they like to call themselves administrative law judges. And that's fine by me, that's okay. They're good people and they're trying hard. But they're usually employed by either the agency or by another federal agency with some protections. They vary. In some agencies, they have very few protections, others more, but it's all just the law can change on that. The rules can change on that too. Some agencies, if the boss doesn't like your decisions, he can fire you. He can move you around. He can rehear the case. In any event, you're being tried not by somebody who has life tenure and doesn't care whether he's popular or not. He's going to give you your rights, period, full stop, try to, at his best. I don't answer to the prosecutor. I don't answer to the legislator. This person does. This person does. And no surprise that the win rate that agencies have before their own employees is a lot higher than it is in federal court. Beyond that, you lose some things along the way. You lose the right to confront your accuser often.